The following lecture is from my Udemy course, Complete 3D Animation Masterclass, Create Animated Shorts. If you like my teaching style and are interested in taking your skills from intermediate or beginner to advanced 3D artist, consider enrolling in my course. Link in the bio. All right, so we've done a lot of hard work to create this beautiful tree, but it is gray. So you might be wondering, how do we add color to these gray models to bring more life into our scene? That's a great question. So the way we're going to do that is by using things called materials, which are also referred to as shaders inside of Maya. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can achieve this. The way we can achieve this is by using a special menu called Hypershade. Hypershade can be accessed in one of two ways. You can either access it through this little sphere here, and this is going to give you access to Hypershade, or you can come up here to Windows, Rendering Editors, and Hypershade, and this is going to pull this up. Now, Hypershade is a submenu inside of Maya, so it does take up quite a bit of real estate here on your screen, so just be aware of that. I had to pull mine on from my other screen because I use two monitors. This is one of the reasons why. But Hypershade is going to be how we can texture our objects and how we can add color to them. Now, we're going to get into texturing later on. Texturing is the process of actually using external images to add graphics to our objects. But we're going to start by just looking at basic materials. Now, I'm going to want to try and position this so I can essentially see my material bin and my attributes and my tree. So I'm just going to move that over there so we can see all of this at once, and we can talk about what's going on here in Hypershade. In terms of Hypershade, we have some menus up here. These rarely, if ever, get used, so you can pretty much ignore those. Next, we're going to have our various bins which contain things. So the material bin is the main one we want to be on. So if you're not seeing the materials, just be aware you can click into that. You'll also see textures, utilities, rendering, lights, camera, shading. I think there's a few other hiding down here, but we don't care. Now, what are these? These are the default materials that Maya always uses. For example, this first one here called Lambert 1, if we click on that, will show up in the Properties Manager, which is over here. Notice it also shows up in the Attribute Editor. These are essentially the same thing, but there are slight differences, and we'll talk about that later. But what this does is it controls the color of all the default objects in the scene. As a general practice, you do not change Lambert 1, okay? When you're working on an entire Maya production, you work with a team, generally speaking. So what that means is when you change Lambert 1 for you, you change it for everyone, and that might bug them. So just be aware of that. We don't really want to change that. This here is how we can change it. So we're not going to do that. We're going to create our own. But the Properties tab over here is essentially how we can change this. There's also a material viewer. Mine's really small for some reason here, so let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit more real estate. That gives you a preview of what it looks like. Now over here, we have our creation area where we can create our materials from, and here we have our node editing area. So that's our work area. We're not going to use this in the section. That's going to be used for texturing. We are, however, going to create some materials here. We're going to select them from here and edit them from here. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the materials that we're going to be using. We're going to just be using things called Lamberts, but you'll notice there are a lot of different materials in here. If you use the side scroller, you can slide up and down and look through these. Plenty of materials and other nodes. We're going to get into quite a few of these by the end of this course. But to get started, let's go ahead and start with the most basic shader here called the Lambert. The Lambert is the most simple shader you can gain access to. It is the base foundation of all 3D materials, essentially. I want to start us here to kind of get a feel for what materials are, how they work as we work our way into the more advanced types of materials. To create this Lambert, you can simply click its name, and it will place a Lambert up here in this top section. So you'll see now this is our new Lambert here. You'll also notice it has the name Lambert 2, which we can see in either the property editor or the attribute editor if you have it open. Now we can go ahead and name this. I'm going to go ahead and name this tree green 1 underscore material. This is going to be our first green color, and we can go ahead and start exploring changing color. Now we can change the color here with the color dial in the properties. Let's talk about the anatomy of this. There's 3 sections to this. The first one is our color picker. This is the actual color of what the material is going to be. The next is going to be our value slider. This is how bright our material is going to be. Then the file section is a file input, and this is for texturing. We're not going to get into that in this one, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that in future lectures. Now, what we're going to care about is clicking the color here. And when we do, this is going to pull up a color picker, which we can change the color. If you've never worked with one of these before, this is an HSV wheel, a hue, saturation, value wheel. Sometimes HSB, hue, saturation, and brightness. On the outside, you have your hues, which is the master category of the color. So we're going to want to set this to be some sort of green. And then on the center, you have your value, which is your brightness or darkness, and you have your saturation, which is the purity. And if you click this dot around, you can change that. Notice the hue revolves around the outside. So as you spin that, you get different colors. But this is how we can get the colors on the inside here. So that will be my green. Cool. We have this green material. How do we get it on our object? Well, there's actually several ways to get this onto our object, but let's look at one of the most basics. One of the most basic is to click with your middle mouse button here and drag over your object in the viewport and then lift your finger off the middle mouse button. And that will go ahead and allow you to drag and drop the material to your object. That is one of the most basic ways to assign our objects, but notice that only affected one object. Now, what's cool about materials is because they're separate entities from objects, you can actually use one material on multiple objects. So for example, if I wanted to apply this to the next tree segment, I could middle mouse drag, release, and you'll see it's now coloring that. What's equally cool is because this is its own node, it's its own entity, we can still make changes. So let's say I wanted it to be fall. Well, I could come in here and we could change that tree to be red or brown. Okay, so we can change this anytime we like. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and explore some of the other ways that we can assign the material. Depending on your circumstances, you might want to assign your material a number of different ways. For example, let's say we wanted to assign this material to the tree all at once. So that way we didn't have to drag and drop for each segment, especially if any of you went crazy and decided to make the human-centered tree and it has 100 segments, right? So we could select one, shift-click and select another, and we could come over to the material here. And if you right-click on the material here, you'll see a swizzle menu. And while you're holding down right-click, you can move this little swizzle here to select different aspects of this menu. Now, be careful that you don't hover over one because sometimes they make sub-menus. But you notice right here, there is an assign material to selection. This will assign the material to everything you have selected. So if we go ahead and assign material to selection, you'll see that it's going to assign to those areas. Very convenient. Let's say I wanted the stump to be the same color, which I don't, but I'm going to do this anyway. You can also right-click on the object to achieve this. Now we're going to get into what these menus do later, but what I'm doing here is selecting the stump and right-clicking on it to access this menu. At the very bottom of this, you're going to see a few options here: assign new material, assign favorite, and assign existing. If you go to assign existing, it will bring a dropout menu. Here you'll see tree green 1 material is listed. We can hover over that and release our finger from the mouse button, and it will assign it. So now you'll see I have a nice green tree. But it's kind of boring looking, right? Maybe we want to get more than one tree color. Maybe we want to get a stump color. Maybe we want to add some variety. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I can go ahead and shift click these individual segments here so that we have some breakup here. I can right click, and this time I'm going to assign a new material. So I'm going to assign the material and I'm going to create it simultaneously. This is an excellent way to approach assigning materials if it doesn't already exist and you need it to be assigned to multiple objects to begin with. So once I release my mouse key, this is going to pull up the creation menu from our hypershade, but as a sub menu, a floating menu. And from here, we can just click what we want. So in this case, I'm going to click a Lambert, and you'll see it's going to place this inside of here. So now I have a new Lambert, and you'll see that it's assigned itself to this tree. Now, that's a pretty funny looking tree. So let's go ahead and get this set up right. I'm going to name this. I'm going to make this tree And let me check the name of the first one, tree green. That's what I named it. So I'm going to name this tree green 2 underscore material. And we can come into the color here and we can pick a new color. Now, something to notice is our old colors are here. So I can pick an old color, click on that, and then I can modify it slightly. So if I wanted the same value, I could just kind of move it around, or the same hue rather. I think I might want to push this more towards a yellowish color, maybe get some more variety here. Similar value. Or maybe I want this one to be a bit darker. Maybe that would be better. So just have some variety. Maybe come back in and select the original color. There we go. That looks okay. All right, so that's going to be how we can assign a material at the same time. If you're not comfortable with any of these, just practice them. You don't have to use one you don't understand. There's more than one way for a reason. All right, you'll learn as you go. Use whatever's comfortable. So let's go ahead and get some stump on there. I'm just going to create the manual way again here. Just go into Lambert here, and we'll just pick a color, come over here to brown and grab that. And we'll just go ahead and middle mouse drag that onto our tree. So now our tree is pretty and has some color. Okay, so now that we've gone over how to assign these, how to create these, what they are in general, let's take a look at a couple more channels just to give you a little bit more creative freedom. I'm personally not going to use them, but you might find some interest in them. So let's come to our first material here, our tree 1 green, and let's talk about the other things we can control besides color. In addition to color, we have the ability to control transparency, which is whether or not the object is see-through. And you'll see we can make that transparent set up there. So that's good for things like glass, or if you have a water surface, you want to be able to see through it. It can also be really cool for effects like laser beams, if you want to make something solid but see-through. There's ambient color. What this does is it adds ambient lighting. So this simulates something called global illumination in light, which is the ability of a light to bounce around a scene. We don't really use ambient color anymore, but in early 3D graphics, this was used as a supplement to light because lighting formulas weren't as good. The next one is incandescence, which is actually the ability to appear as if an object's glowing. So the idea here is to kind of give a glowing effect. So if you think about something like a computer, a lot of the times it has an on light. This is how you would achieve that. And with each of these, you can map color to them. So you can see we can make it have a glowing color of some sort. And the amount of this basically is the amount it glows. And we'll talk more about this when we get into lighting. Ambient color, the same thing. If you wanted it to have like the ambient color of the sky, or if you were on Mars and wanted it to have a red color, or if there was a sunset, you could do that. Transparency is a little bit trickier. You'll see it has the opposite color of the transparency. So just be aware of that if you're using transparency. It'll be the opposite of whatever the color is you want. So if you look completely across the color wheel here, you'll see magenta gives us green, yellow is going to give us blue, blue is going to give us red. I guess blue kind of gives us orange, cyan gives us red, but you can see that set up there. Okay, so feel free to play around with those. Now, once we're done with this, we can just hit the exit button on our hypershade here, and we have our colored tree.